All right. Yes, so we're continuing on with the Eightfold Path. Today we did chapter 16, Right Livelihood, which was talking about earning a living without, quote, transgressing your ideals of love and compassion. And yeah, a lot of this was fairly straightforward. There were a few points that I thought, based on previous conversations, like at the bottom of that first page, we had where he's talking about, not violating or not transgressing the 5 mindfulness trainings, and that we should try to have a vocation that's beneficial to humans, animals, plants, and the earth, or at least minimally harmful. And I know that was something we talked about in a previous week on
Yeah.
some other another chapter about trying, not causing harm and how we can do that. And we can still recognize, as he does here, that there are still some things that cause more harm than others, or are more inherently harmful in the way that things are set up, and that others could have the potential to maybe become less harmful, or and I
Mm-hmm.
felt it was a very practical. I thought it was a pretty practical approach to say, well, there are people that, this is your livelihood. Maybe you didn't necessarily choose this. This was your family. You're kind of maybe stuck in a way
I liked
because
the
you don't
phrase
have a
on
lot
the
of options.
yeah. I liked the phrase on this page where it says we should be awake to the consequences. I
Mm-hmm.
thought that was a really concise way to put it. It's just
Yes, right at the top.
opening up your mind to the, like, how each thing that we're choosing to do is affecting has far reaching effect.
Yes, and that interconnectedness of all of these things, which in present society, where they often say, leave work at the door, don't think about home when you're at work, don't think about work when you're at home, and that's not. And Ben, uh, correct me if that's not how it is by you, but here that's a very common saying. They're like, you shouldn't bring the personal stuff to work, and work should stay at the door, and don't think about it. But
It's
both are your life.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's not really a saying we have here. I mean, there's talk about work-life balance, of course, but not specifically keep leave your work at work. And I know some people who have really big difficulties with that and turning off their work brain.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it is important to do. I see what you're saying as far as I think the phrase could be used to put too much of a separation between these two things. But overall, I do think it's a valuable mentality. But I think it comes down to just realizing if you're at work and you're mindful of all the things you got to do, for the most part, with most jobs, you should be able to accomplish your task in the time you've been given. Like, at work. And I only say this because it's been a recent conversation with some coworkers of mine in the education field. And for the most part, if I plan my week properly, even if I have to use some of my prep periods to sub other classes, I generally don't have to come home and do any kind of grading or lesson planning. I can, in fact, leave most of my job at work, right? Like, as far as the functional tasks of it go. But I think the connection would be that when I leave work, I continue to think of myself as an educator. I think of myself as somebody who needs to continue to be aware that my character is has the potential to be judged no matter where I am
Mm.
as an educator, and that's where I wouldn't leave my work at the door personally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a usefulness to the saying to, not allow stress of things that you sometimes can't even do because you're not at work. Some people can do their work at home, but
Yeah.
If you can't even do anything about it and you're sitting there like stressing about, oh,
Yeah,
I
there's
have this
no need
deadline
to.
coming up, or
Mm-hmm.
that, then of course it's very useful to say, well, leave the work at work because
For
you
sure.
can't do anything about it now.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess in the way of sometimes people say, oh, I just do that thing there and then I am a different person at home or something like that. I've seen sometimes, and it's like, no, but you're not. And or that they can treat people at work differently than outside of it.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit of a tangent, but just that that's also your life, and these are decisions you're making and ways that you're spending it. And if we're spending it on something that's
Well, as he'll
not
say
in
at
line
the
with everything else.
yeah, as he'll say late at near the end of the chapter when we get to it, it's you can't practice one part of the path without practicing all of it. It's all connected, and it's that same way, right? It's way at the end. Don't worry about finding it. We'll get to it later. Oh,
Okay,
that's a
yeah,
good
we'll
one.
come back to it.
Right livelihood is
Yeah.
not a personal matter. This is our collective karma.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, that point I thought was actually, maybe this is what we should be talking about, right? Better. He says it again down here, that because of this interconnectedness of everything
Yeah.
and the things that we're doing are affecting others,
Mm-hmm.
we can actually specifically use teaching as an example in here. So I
Yeah.
wonder how you were feeling reading this, but saying, oh, you can say, well, I'm a teacher, I'm doing something great, and this other person is doing something that's not right livelihood. But if you're contributing to them having a job, that or even like the society as a whole, and you're not doing anything to change that,
Mm-hmm.
that person's job only exists because people want to eat the meat, and
Mm-hmm.
somebody then needs to prepare the animal for being eaten. And so we're in a way causing somebody else to have to do something that is also misaligned with those values. Then that's everybody's responsibility. Then it's not just, oh, well, the butcher made a bad life choice or something.
Yeah, I appreciate that the reality of like this job exists because people want it, right? Like there are consumers for the product. I mean, and that's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing when you get to the more broader concept of conscientious consumerism. This idea of
Mm-hmm.
you vote with your dollar, you make your opinion known with how you spend your money, and so certain things exist on our shelves and practices are pushed or done because we allow it by paying for it.
Right. And we can complain all we want. Well, I suppose some people complain and actually, you know, try to do something about it. And other people just complain that it's that way, but then continue to reinforce it, right? If you
Mm-hmm.
you
But
can
I
say all you
really,
want.
but I really
Mm.
wonder if, say, a very small minority, say, go vegan, for example. I'm not sure that has really that much of an impact on the greater society. So, sure, it's always, I mean, always follow your ideals or live according to your ideals by all
Mm-hmm.
means, but I'm not sure the effect on the greater society is as pronounced as this book would have us believe.
I think it's not as short term, maybe. Like that actually the example you just used, people choosing not to eat meat. If you look at 30 years ago, which maybe that's a little hard for us, but you see how society was 30 years ago and what kind of options people had for not eating meat,
Mm.
especially in cultures that are very meat heavy. And then you move ahead, okay, then to 15 years ago, where people started pushing a lot more for veganism, became kind of trendy with social media, vegetarians,
It is
like
a
they
lot
started to
easier.
have
Yeah.
some. There were some options, right, that were more accessible to people who come from cultures that were very meat focused. Like I am maybe fortunate to have grown up and with the influences from, you know, one side of my family that like had been in monasteries or were familiar with like Buddhist food practices in Vietnam, and my aunt actually used to like eat with them that way when she was there, and she does eat meat now but in very small amounts, you know. It and but having though people who know how to prepare vegetarian and vegan dishes in a way that just like it's they're so good. They're so delicious and healthy, and that was just a normal thing in the culture, and I grew up with that, and it was so much easier for me to transition into that than it would have been for a lot of other people. And
Mm,
Yeah.
now we have like, you know, vegan burgers and sausages and deli meat and all these kinds of things that didn't exist when I started, like when I stopped eating meat. None of those things were sold in stores, and especially not where I live in the Midwest. Like that's all meat, cheese, and beer. Like, you know, so
mm, that's a good
you can
point, actually.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a lot
it's
more
still not.
accessible now to eat that diet and not feel like you only can eat at home and you can eat salad. Like that's your option. Um you this
Or not even
absolutely
salad sometimes, right?
yeah, it's far more accessible to navigate society with that diet. There are so many options now. And I think that is coming from the people voting with their money, right? Like is saying, "Hey, we want these options. We'll pay for these options." And now the options have been made.
Mm-hmm. And there will continue to be more because those companies, some of them are doing quite well, and there is more and more competition on the market. I mean, now of course it's capitalism too, so it has to fit in with this, but there is a need there for it, and as more options are available, people will. I mean, there's even meatless Mondays, right? We
Mhm.
have trends like that. People also make
Yeah.
the decision not even for compassionate reasons, but just because of health concerns, because our
Yeah.
diets are too heavy in meat and dairy, and it's actually causing health issues. And if they could just eat a little bit less and be a little bit more moderate, and that definitely translates to a direct, like a, you know, you can calculate. I don't know if they have done this or if it would be very accurate, but you could potentially calculate, okay, how many cows do we have to slaughter every day to keep up with the demand? But now, if people are buying slightly less, people are eating less meat,
I would
then maybe
wager
we
this
don't
math has been
have
done.
to.
Yes.
Or they're probably noticing some difference, and who knows? There's a lot of factors, right? But in another 50 years, what might that look like? If,
Mhm.
if more people start to do that and the culture becomes more accepting of that, so instead of people being ridiculed for not eating meat, like 15 years ago, they'll start to just be like, oh, yeah, that's just a thing. Even now, it's shifted a little bit. People will still poke fun. Where I live, the like culturally, it's like semi accepted, right? People are aware, but some people are still like, you need to, you know, put some meat on them bones. You gotta have a steak. You gotta have some pot roast, whatever. And even though when I ate meat, I actually lost most of my weight while I was eating the meat, but okay. So, you know, there's still like some kind of judgments, but if you have a whole generation that's growing up where it's more prevalent, that shifts cultures.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
That will make a
that's
difference.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yes, this conscientious consumerism is not going to like change the whole world immediately, but maybe it's a step still, right?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting topic that one. So I think it's more complex than that even too, but we'll get very far out of the context of the chapter if we go down that. So, um, let's see, what is this part about? Why did I highlight this? Oh, this part too. where he's talking about a farmer who raises cattle for slaughter, and he
Mm-hmm.
tries to do it in the best way possible. But you know, it wasn't really his choice. But he's got to support his family, and his father left him this farm and all this. And then he's saying every time a cow is slaughtered, it leaves an impression on his consciousness, which will come back to him in dreams, during meditation, and at the moment of death. It is right livelihood to look after his cows so well while they're alive. He has to wish to be kind to his cows. He also wants the security of regular income for himself and his family. But that this thing, you know, this part that's not so right, is then going to follow him. That something you do outside of this is it's always going to, you know, like maybe he cannot be at peace as long as he's doing this. That will always be somewhere deep inside of him, right? Just that reminder that, you know, even if you kind of, a lot of times our jobs become sort of an autopilot, right? We're sort of automating ourselves to just do the same things every day, but somewhere it will affect your consciousness. Oh, and then everything we do contributes to our effort to practice right livelihood. So it's more than just how we earn our paycheck. It's all everything we're doing that reduces suffering,
Yeah.
increases compassion, and that we can resolve to help create a society in which there's more right livelihood and less wrong livelihood, which I think kind of maybe sums up.
Yeah, it's
All
not
of ties
about
everything together.
being perfect at it or succeeding 100%, but just making those small changes to attempt, incremental change. Like,
At some point, it even acknowledges that 100% right livelihood isn't even possible.
mm-hmm.
I think that is on one of the next pages somewhere.
Mm-hmm. What's in this part? Yeah, I remember him saying something like that too, like the way that things are set up, it's very, very difficult because of how everything is connected, but
It's on 198. Or maybe not. I think it was go back. Yeah, between the highlighted parts, we cannot succeed at having a right livelihood 100%.
oh yeah, just stop too early. Yeah, anyway, even if you can't do the whole thing, a little is still better than none, right?
Yeah.
That's the point. Something is better than nothing, so we should just do our best with what we can do, and maybe for some people it will be possible, and for some people it won't. Well, for most people. I imagine that somewhere in some like smaller, more remote areas where things are a little bit more self-sufficient, maybe you could have right livelihood completely 100%. But alas, not here. Yes, and then the rest of the chapter, I think mainly just reminding us to be mindful in how we do it and practicing all of the other uh spokes, right? All of the other right speech and right concentration and right mindfulness as we do all of these things in our work and in our lives. Um, that doing things, yeah, if you're causing others to suffer, that it's going to kind of like pollute or poison your mind,
Right.
just like something you're doing physically. Um, yeah, and then everything is connected. Was there anything else that either of you had highlighted that you wanted to discuss in this chapter?
On this next page, it says at the top of the paragraph there, now the time has come to do something to lessen our suffering. Once we know what is feeding us suffering, we find a way to cease ingesting that nutriment, whether it is edible food, the food of sense impression, all that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always enjoy these like call to arms sort of announcements,
Yeah.
as I find them a little delightful. Generally, though, I just like the reminder, like, hey, take stock of your life, assess these things, and try to lessen the suffering in it. But here it is near the end of this chapter. It's like the second to last sentence. It's the one I mentioned earlier. In fact, it is not possible to practice one element of the Eightfold Path without practicing all 7 other elements. And I think that's so true. The more we talk about it, I would like to think it reveals itself as at how interconnected everything is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why it can get so hard to talk to somebody, I think, about the Eightfold Path, because you want to be like, but this, but also this, and this. And all of this
Mm-hmm.
comes, you know what I mean? And it's hard to talk about it with somebody who hasn't thought about it before, because it's so intertwined and looped in on itself.
Yeah, it seems complicated, right? It seems to be, because there's all these parts, and they like to name them in a list, but then the list isn't really like actually separate things at all. But
Yes.
then once you get them all, like, okay, now part 2, this is the last chapter of part 2. This was the last part of the Eightfold Path. And next we go into other basic Buddhist teachings, apparently. But now that we finished them, was kind of felt like we were reading more or less about the same thing for the last couple of months while we got through this part, right? But they all seem like one thing. It doesn't seem like, oh, well, now I have to remember 8 different things. And if I don't remember even what he named them here, because I know some places they call them slightly different things, but
Mm-hmm.
even if you don't remember any of them, I think by this point you get like a pretty good idea of a good grasp on, okay, acting like this will help reduce suffering, and following this, overall
Mindset.
Yeah.
yeah, mindset. It's consistent. The rightness. We just go for the rightness in all these things. It's just all the different areas, right? Essentially, it's one approach that applies universally to how you perceive. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting a phone call. How you perceive the things around you, inside yourself, your thoughts, your emotions, your work,
Right.
your like it just literally everything that you do in your life. If you just have this one approach, that it's only one. It's just one.
Right.
Yes. Okay, and we did do 17 for today as well. This I highlighted quite a bit of stuff. So, yeah,
Yeah,
jump in
it's
wherever.
something that we haven't talked about or have seen talked about too often, I think. These 2 truths.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
I felt very much that we have kind of, I guess we haven't talked about it as specifically in book club as much, but I think in the server we've talked about these things. We just don't name them this way, and sometimes people, I think, there's a little bit of maybe argument or misunderstanding because people are talking about these 2 different things that seem contradictory,
Yeah.
but they're not magic. I don't know, on this first bit from this poem, I really liked the way that this was worded. I thought this was kind of fun. I don't know if it's supposed to be fun, but saying wherever there's joy, there's suffering. If you want to have no suffering, you must accept no joy. Like, obviously, that's not what people are going for when they're trying to say they don't want to suffer, right?
Right.
And just a simple way to say everything that he then elaborates on how that works for the rest of the next few paragraphs here.
Yeah, what I
Um,
what I highlighted is because I'm not sure I understand it, is if you recognize and accept your pain without running away from it, you will discover that although pain exists, joy also exists. Without experiencing relative joy, you will not know what to do when you are face to face with absolute joy. Yeah, I'm not sure what is being said here.
Mm-hmm. I highlighted part of that too, but not for that reason. I, in my limited knowledge and interpretation, it feels like that it's revealing to say that if I accept that this one thing exists, I must accept the other thing exists even if I don't have it at this moment. Um Additionally, if I haven't experienced, I'm going to call it a lighter version of something, how am I going to recognize the heavier version when I come across it? Um, and to me, it ties into just other ways I approach things in the world of scaffolding, of building up to things. I believe very much in fundamental tools. You know, it's hard to, even though I know babies do it all the time. They're like, you gotta crawl before you walk. Like, plenty of babies who skip crawling.
Mm.
But this idea of getting there, I guess, to me. But
I
how can
thought
I
this
be
was.
awake if I
Oh,
never sleep? It's also where my brain goes.
I think that's definitely uh like an important point because he as he's talking about relative, um, like the relative truth is like the things that we experience, right? So for that category, it is anything that's like a physically experience, uh, like our mental formations, like basically the things of the world are the relative truth, and then absolute truth. He says, and maybe the rest of the chapter actually makes this make more sense because I think you're right at the point where he mentions this here. It doesn't really have. It doesn't seem to mean anything. It doesn't have a concrete. Um, like the expression is kind of strange, right? But as we go on, I think he elaborates on this, and this makes a lot more sense by the end of the chapter. And maybe if this had been later, it would make more sense. Or and kind of maybe he's, mentioning back what he'd said in other chapters about like you have to go through suffering to find joy. You can't just forget about it. You can't ignore it. You can't distract yourself because it doesn't go away. You have like the key to joy is in the suffering and understanding your suffering and looking deeply at the source of that suffering and then learning the ways that you can actually alleviate that and that they come from the same, the events that you think are causing your suffering, usually they're not, and they also you can switch how you look at it and make that like transform that into joy, as he says in the title. I think even at the end of the, let's see, there are a couple places that I highlighted in the next few pages that I think maybe help to, at least the way that I'm thinking about this. Um, like he's saying, you have to acknowledge existence and understand its causes. Like if you have a headache, by staying in touch with what's going on, you understand both nature of suffering and the nature of joy. Like being mindful of what's going on and how something could be.
I
Uh-oh,
really
hold on, where am I?
appreciated, notably, I did highlight the headache one as well. I appreciated the moment to stop and say, you have to acknowledge it. It's not an illusion, because we do frequently, I think, in these circles, discuss things as being illusionary. Oh, this is just an
Yeah,
illusion. That comes up quite a
yeah,
bit, but acknowledging it and saying you can't just brush it off with that, right? You have to acknowledge that this thing exists and understand it has a cause and deal with it, right? There are very practical
Mhm.
things you're supposed to be doing, and we're not meant to necessarily just be like, your headache's an illusion.
yeah. That's also absolutely true. I mean, it has a sort of down to earthness to it, because if someone comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm headache," and you tell them, "Oh, your headache is illusionary," they will tell, "Yeah, well, fuck off. My
Yeah.
headache is very much real," and that's that
My
way
headache disagrees.
exactly. And this makes it more. I feel this shows this Buddhism has a practical layer to it, and it's not just all lofty philosophy and thinking stuff. It's actually, yeah, you have this pain, and it's valid to have this pain, so to speak.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, maybe that's good to tie back. Like, a lot of times it's treated as if this absolute truth part is the
Yeah,
only one.
yeah, yeah.
And he's saying, well, no, there's two, right? There's two different,
And
interconnected, but
mm,
both
Mm-hmm.
are, they're two truths. They're both called truths. It's not that one is real and the other one isn't. And
Right.
yeah, absolutely. I've seen that attitude a lot too. Um, on here, let's see. So we're gonna tie all these things back up to that part that Ben pointed out. Um, Here at the bottom of this next page, where he's talking about there's no suffering, no cause of suffering, no cessation, and no path, and that would be a contradiction to what the Buddha said in this other part, but it's not, because he means that when he says no suffering, he means that suffering is made entirely of things that are not suffering, that it can only
Mm-hmm.
exist. It that's also somewhat in relation, right? That whether you suffer or not depends on many circumstances, and he gives examples of, cold is painful when you're not wearing appropriate clothing,
I
but
really like that because he's right. Like, I can absolutely enjoy a brisk day outside, right? But I gotta be
yes,
wearing the right clothes.
absolutely.
But that brisk air
or
can be so enjoyable and such a delight
mhm.
to go and be in, or it can
Yeah,
be very, very painful.
Or like somebody who comes from a very warm tropical climate that's like in 85 degrees all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and then they come somewhere like here it's 50. I mean, today it's actually pretty cold, but it could be like 55, and here we'll be like, that's so nice, we just got through winter.
Mm-hmm.
55 is great, people are wearing t-shirts and shorts, and they're happy to be outside, and that person would be bundled up wearing winter coats and hats and complaining that it's cold, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they aren't used to that, and it's literally the exact same ex- the experience is very different, but they're in the same place, in the same temperature. Like, there's no difference between them. They could be standing right next to each other. And I really like this. Suffering is not objective.
Mm-hmm.
It,
yeah,
we don't really think of that much. There are things that cause you to suffer, but do not cause others to suffer. There are things that bring you joy, but do not bring others joy. And that, yeah, again, as a relative truth, but that's not the deepest teaching, but you should still understand that it's still true.
Yeah.
Um, okay, what else do we have? We had the five remembrances, basically remembering that you will die and get old, and these are just the nature of life.
I
Number five
personally
is
didn't
very good.
highlight anything again until 212.
That's fine. We can kind of, I mean, these are like reminder things,
I
right?
do, yeah. I mean, they're all good information. It was good stuff. I just, none of it was like, ooh, I gotta highlight that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love the wave imagery again, but we talked about that in a previous chapter,
Mhm.
that, if we think of ourselves like a wave that's a part of this greater thing, we won't be so upset anymore about birth or death, or, just understanding that that is our nature. Um, here. This one I think is again relevant to that. Liberation is the ability to go from the world of signs to the world of true nature. So we have to understand the relative world of the wave, but we also need to touch the water, the ground of our being, to have real peace and joy. I wish I could have 2 pages open at the same time. Oh wait, I have a tablet. I can have 2 pages open. Or go back to that part that you were saying was confusing, because I think all of these parts kind of explain what he was trying to get at. At least that's what I thought. Yeah, here it is. Anyway. So I think this is kind of the bridge, right? If he's talking about, learning with mindfulness to enjoy the things around you, and if you can't do that, then you can't be liberated from the mindset of the wave to the mindset of the water. If you can't even see the wave in the first place, you can't really understand how all of it works together. You have to see both, right?
Yeah. Ideally, both at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Also, that coincidentally, looking deeply into relative truth is how we penetrate the absolute. Mindfulness again. Looking deeply. Oops. Alright, I get back to where I had.
Somehow the cow will offer today's Dharma talk.
I like that a lot too. It sounds so funny, right? But it's a really good way of, like, he has such a way of illustrating the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, the cow's not literally giving the Dharma talk, but without the cow to feed him.
He would not be able to because he had an ouchie in his stomach.
Oh yeah, especially if he has, I don't know how often he has yogurt, but yeah, without the things that provide me sustenance, I would not be here, right? That all of those elements must contribute to anything that we're doing. I really like this part too, actually. Why should we say that dying is suffering? We continue with the next generations. What is essential is to be our best while we are here. Then we continue to move through our children and grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
Motive by love, invest in ourselves, and that, like, just continuing that thought that we won't be affected by it when we think of ourselves again, not as just the wave, but as a part of the whole ocean.
On this page, I highlighted this sheet of paper and I wrote above it, "This is not a sheet of paper."
That's good notes.
That's good notes.
Now you're gonna remember that when you finish the book, right?
um, right after I highlighted in that area too, Lee. I highlighted a human being is made up of only non-human elements.
Mm-hmm.
I liked that whole thought process he follows through that paragraph. It's good.
So totally, well, definitely related. Not what we usually do in book club. I just keep thinking of that image of the guy that's like, is this is this what I is this a human? Is
Is
this
this a butterfly?
but then the answer is just always going to be yes, because
Because of interconnectedness.
Yeah. New meme for the server. Why, yes, it is. Good job. Yeah, I didn't really highlight anything in the next few pages. It's just a very, very much that different ways of talking about that.
I did highlight oh gosh. I think if you go back up just a sec. At the bottom. No. I am wrong. Never mind. Haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, let's see.
It was the bottom of this page.
Okay.
It was talking about this chicken. And then I highlighted, she does not realize that the real joy of this moment is the joy of not being slaughtered, the joy of being alive. After the hen is like, I like the rice better than the corn.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an interesting thing of like, we often will focus in on the little inconveniences of life or the little decisions, right? When reality is that we just need to be aware of like, I'm still here to do all of these things and experience these things. And it's my duty to be mindful of this moment. I'm not saying you can't have an opinion on rice versus corn, but I just thought it was an interesting anecdote to use, or not anecdote, metaphor, I guess.
Well, and he didn't even say, well, she's wrong. She's talking about relative joy.
Yeah.
But she doesn't see the absolute truth here. So
Right.
there's two levels, and she's only aware of the one. Right? Ultimately, if we could be aware of both and also find the joy in both, right? If you can realize the joy of being alive and not the fear of being slaughtered in the next, I don't know, hour or whatever, perhaps she will enjoy the rice even more and not complain about the corn.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this part I did highlight. Yeah, he mentioned again, the deeper level of practice is to lead our daily life in a way that we touch both the absolute and the relative truth. So you can't just forget one in pursuit of the other. And then this, again, he said a few times throughout the book, but I really think this needs to be stressed because I don't think this is always what people like. This is not the approach that I found in some other, maybe other schools, we can say, but he says practice in a way that gives you the greatest relief. The wave is already water. Like it should just be easy to do it. It should feel good when you do it. It shouldn't feel like a bad thing. It's supposed to have it will be something that is natural. If you're doing it right, all
Yeah,
of this will come together.
yeah, he said that earlier as well. I think we came across this in one of the other chapters that practice should come somewhat easily, yeah, and not be painful or stressful.
Yeah, that if you're sitting too hard, then you're not actually doing it right anymore, are you? That whole thing. Yep, listening to relative and absolute dimensions at the same time. And this too contradicts a lot of religious texts. You don't have to die to enter nirvana or the kingdom of God. You only have to dwell deeply in the present moment right now. I can imagine that being something that is just like foundation shaking, maybe. Like, no, you can just do it right now. All you have to do is be mindful. Follow the path. There it is.
On this page.
Oh, here. Oh, go ahead.
No, you.
No, you. This end of this paragraph, I think this goes back to that that early quote that Ben pointed out too. The truth of the path is one with the truth of suffering. Every second I'm on the path that leads out of suffering, suffering is there to guide me. That is why it's a holy path. That you can't follow it without the suffering. They have to be the same thing. It has to be through. The path is through suffering. It's not a sidestep. It goes straight through the middle.
Believe it or not, that was the same thing I was going to point out and also refer back to Ben.
Well, good. We're all on the same page.
We're all on the same page. We're doing great. Team. I personally did not highlight anything again until the last page of this chapter.
Me too. So, wait. So, Ben, do you feel differently? Actually, if we go way back up to that other quote, do you feel differently about it now? If you recognize and accept your pain without running away from it, you will discover that although pain exists, joy also exists. Without experiencing relative joy, you will not know what to do when you are face to face with absolute joy. Does it seem like it has a different meaning, or does it make maybe more sense than it did an initial read?
Can't say it does. Maybe just a weird sentence or something, but
Yeah, if we reword it, I think he's saying through that both pain and joy exist together. You have to accept the pain instead of avoiding it, and that if you can experience the relative joy, as in physical, mental, like the joy of the world, that will enable you to understand joy in the absolute sense of the no death, no birth, we are all water sense of absolute joy.
maybe.
Maybe? Oh, it's okay. Did you have something else we should discuss before we go past then? I just don't want to leave your concern and just be like, it doesn't matter.
No, I haven't actually highlighted anything. Or maybe, yeah, well, that's on the next page. Yeah.
I really like this whole paragraph here. Okay, the next page.
Yeah, basically it's all about interconnectedness again. So a true flower contains the whole universe, and a rose is not a rose. That's why it is an authentic rose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, going beyond the relative truth to the absolute truth beyond conceptual thinking. Yeah.
I love that this sentence, that exact one, a rose is not a rose. That is why it is authentic. If you said that earlier, it might be like, what are they talking about? But with this exact paragraph, by the time you get there, you're like, yes, of course. So fun how that's structured. A human is not a human. That's why we can say he is a human. So fun.
Oh, excuse me.
Oh, Des, you said something on the last page?
Oh yeah, it's that second to last paragraph. The whole paragraph's pretty good, but I highlighted: you have a concept of yourself, but have you touched your true self? Look deeply and try to overcome the gap between your concept of reality and reality itself. Meditation helps us remove concepts, and just realizing, just reemphasizing that meditation's use helps peel back those layers and getting to that absolute truth. I liked it.
Mm-hmm. I like that one too. Very much. Again, the call to action that happens at the end of all the chapters, right? Now that we understand the two truths,
Mm-hmm.
look back to yourself and did you do this yet? Do you understand? Maybe do it again.
Do it again. Go team, we're
Yeah.
enlightened.
Go team, enlightened once more.